So he talks about this being fair and just, basically, that you beware of oppression in trade and commerce. And that's basically when someone is harmed in some form or fashion. And there's really two categories for this. There's a general harm, where what you do impacts the market in general. And then there's a specific harm where you can take advantage of or oppress a particular customer. So the general harm here is something like a monopoly. And in the Islamic law, a monopoly is where a person purchases with the intention of commerce and trade, purchases something and then holds on to it until it becomes absent in the marketplace. And they do this in order to raise the price while the market has a need for it. And in particular, this has to do with staple foods. So, you may go and purchase as much rice as possible, or as much flour or wheat or something that's possible, until the market dries up and you hold it in your stores. And then when the market's dried up, people need it, they become desperate for it, then you jack the price real high in order to take advantage of the opportunity. So this is something that is oppressive in nature, impacts the larger society, and so something that should be avoided. And he mentions here in general, dealing in staple foods is something that's sketchy because of the need that community members have for it. So it's, it may be a business, if you can afford to avoid it, you do. The next thing is talking about specific customers and how they can be taken advantage of or oppressed. And this is like when someone is selling a product, the salesman begins to praise the product and embellish what may actually be false. They start to say, this thing can save your life, can save the world, this is the, and we see a lot of that stuff on the infomercials and things where they make false promises about what it can actually do. A lot of the diet pills and those types of things, that industry where they make promises that, look, medically, they're impossible, like a miracle pill or something of that nature. So this is, taking advantage of an individual by essentially cheating them. And the Prophet ﷺ, he prohibited that. He said, "Man ghashana falaysa minna," whoever cheats us is not from us. Another form of that is by concealing and hiding faults and flaws of a product. Right? So, you're selling a car or something, it's a used car, and so you go in and you make some temporary fixes or camouflage some dings or something of that nature so that it's not seen by an unaware customer. And so doing this type of cheating is impermissible when it comes to commerce and industry. Imam Ahmed was asked about mending garments to conceal fault and flaw in the material or tears, etc., so that it would not be apparent to the customer. And he said it's impermissible that the person selling these types of things hide or conceal the flaws of the product. Also, talking about weights and measures, this is still prevalent in the marketplace today. When you go and purchase produce, sometimes they're weighed, and then the price is determined based on the weight. That the merchant has to be very particular and careful about the weight and the scale. This is mentioned in the Quran in Surah al-Mutaffifin, those that tilt the scales. And they should be so diligent to the fact that it should kind of, there should be a buffer, if you will, so that when it's for the customer, that they tilt it a little bit in the customer's favor, and that way they're certain that they avoid any type of oppression or wrongdoing. Also, things like when you're weighing the produce, if it's got dirt, etc., in it, and you weigh that with it, then this is a form of cheating. Like if there's, it has a husk on it or a shell on it, and you know that the dirt's in there, and you just go ahead and weigh it anyway, then you're basically selling them the dirt along with the produce, which they're not intending to buy any dirt or anything that's, strenuous. Same thing goes for like, when you're selling meats and stuff and they're wanting just the pure meat and you leave bone inside and then you sell the bone or something of that nature. Anything that's not customary, right? If it's customary that the bone's left in, then, and that's how it's weighed and it has a price for the bone in, then no problem. Those types of things have to be considered. Also, talking about driving up the prices when there's an auction of sorts, the person begins to drive up the price without intending to actually purchase. They want the price to go up to harm the customer. The next section talks about ihsan bil muamala, and this is benevolence. We know ihsan to mean seeking perfection or wholeness or completeness. And so this is a huge part of our faith is ihsan. And having ihsan in your transactions and your dealings is also something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands. He commands us to be fair and He commands us to be benevolent. And so being benevolent in trade and transaction is being moderate, being lenient, like setting your profit margin to be what's acceptable in the marketplace, as opposed to trying to dupe people by raising a lofty profit margin beyond what is customary. Obviously, trying to set a profit margin is permissible because that's what commerce is all about. It's about making a profit. So you go buy your commodity at $10, and then you're going to want to set a profit margin so you can make a living. But you have to take a survey of the market to determine what's a customary profit margin. Are you going to charge 100% more, 200% more, or whatever is considered customary and acceptable is something that you should stick with, so that you're fair and benevolent when it comes to seeking your wage. And also, even if the customer wants to give you more because they have a desire for the product or a real need for it and they're willing to pay extra, you say, look, the price tag's $100, and they're like, look, I'll give you $1,000 for it right now. That's how bad I want it. From ihsan is to say, look, I don't want your $1,000. It's $100. That's a fair market value for it. I'm going to take the $100 and you have the product. You can walk away with it. That's ihsan. That's being benevolent to the customer. Also from ihsan is when it's time to get paid or when it's time to collect on a debt, that sometimes you pardon them. You release them from their debt or from their payment. Sometimes you reduce it for them. Sometimes you allow them to delay payment if they need. Sometimes you're lenient with them when it comes to the terms of their contract, and sometimes, obviously you take what is required when needed, but you have to be lenient. Also from ihsan is to assist people in their transactions if possible, to rescue someone from a bad deal if needed. If you can see somebody being taken advantage of, you can jump in there so that they're not harmed by the transaction. There are many hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that mention a lot of these things specifically and in general, being nice, kind, and compassionate when it comes to business. Business and commerce should not be seen as a war where you're going in to be shrewd and crude and a shark, right? That the shark tank, the shark mentality is one of a very materialistic society. And though we live in a material world, people of faith, we're not bound by material, and our priority is not material, but it is, gaining Allah's pleasure and His grace and His favor, and that's done by being benevolent to His creatures. The last part here is perhaps as equally important, if not, I would say emphasized currently in our context, and that is the merchant having concern over their faith when it comes to how they function in business. So having concern for your faith, there are things that are very specific to them, and there are things which are general to their hereafter. So the first thing, obviously, is that the businessman does not, or the professional does not, become busied by seeking a wage to the extent that they sacrifice their hereafter. But they have to take some concern, show some concern for their faith. And this is done in 6 ways. So there's 6 basic principles that you can follow and apply in order to, kind of cover both bases, your worldly life and your hereafter. The first of those is having the right intention while at work. And from that intention is that you are going to seek your sustenance so you do not have to ask people for handouts. Also, so that you do not become envious of what other people have and possess. Right? You don't want to have this covetous nature where you see people with things and you covet that. But you earn enough so that you can have what will satisfy. And that's, of course, is in moderation. Right? You're going to be moderate in the way that you live and the way that you use this world. Also, from that intention is taking care of the family, seeing to their needs, and being from, in general, al-mujahideen, right? Earning a halal living is considered a type of mujahada. And then providing a sincere service for the Muslims in general. And this leads to the second part of these 6 points, and that is by establishing trade and commerce and industry, you are fulfilling a communal obligation. And this is something we discussed very early on in the book when it came to types of knowledge, that the religious knowledge is very virtuous and it is what is preferred, but there are other types of knowledge that are required by the society and community in order to handle their basic affairs, like math and like medicine, like science, like management, etc. Those types of things are required for you to know because they're required by the community to live. And the same thing can be said about the actual industry or the business of it, that someone needs to open shops, someone needs to open hospitals, someone needs to open schools, etc., in order to fulfill the needs of the community. And so, here he basically says that you should pick a career path that will put you on that trajectory to fulfilling a need of your community, as opposed to doing something that is frivolous. He says something that has to do with zina, like beauty, or something that is going to basically talabu tana'am, which is just like, the living excessively. So pick something that's important, like maybe a career would be, like I mentioned, a couple of those things that we need, medicine or construction or engineering. Maybe you stay away from selling Pokemon cards, right? I mean, or something of that nature. I'm not saying that it's impermissible to sell toys and things in games, but in order to have shafaqah, he says, concern for your faith, you find something that's actually going to be a benefit and a need, is going to fulfill a need of the community. And then obviously you have to stay away from industry or commerce, which is makruh, disliked, and certainly that which is haram. And there are various different things that are impermissible to be involved in. The third point is that you do not let the worldly market prevent you from the market of the hereafter. So you do not let your job prevent you from coming to the masjid. That is suq ad-dunya is your job. And suq al-akhirah is the masajid. Right? Because when you go to your job, that's the trade and the commerce, what you get is the wage that you earn. When you come to the masjid, what are you after there? A wage with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you don't allow your worldly market to impede visiting the spiritual market of the hereafter. So he says what you should do is make the first part of your day the day in which you enter the market of the hereafter. Start your day off by going to the masjid. Start your day off with worship, with devotion, and be consistent when it comes to the awrad, And those are the designated times in which you devote to certain acts of worship. And you'll find that among the pious predecessors, there were merchants. And this is what they did. They used the beginning of their day and the end of their day for the hereafter. So they started and they ended their day with some type of act of devotion and righteousness. And then they spent the middle of their day in business, trade, commerce, and industry. Whenever they heard the adhan for dhuhr and asr, then of course they went for their prayers. They left off seeking their earnings in order to fulfill their obligations. Number 4 is that you're consistent and constant with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while you're at work. And this is something that you can do regardless pretty much of what it is that you're performing work-wise, is that you are constantly saying subhanallah, alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, various types of adhkar, so that you're filling that work time with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 5 is that you're not overly concerned with the market and with commerce. It's not your ultimate objective and goal. It's not your sole aim and purpose. So an indicator, he says, you're not the first one to go to the market, and then you're not the last one to leave. Right? You're not the first. This is kind of, it's like, whoa, that sounds a little bit rogue, doesn't it? For what we're taught in school and in business school and first one in, last one out. You're right, that does show a great commitment to your job. It certainly does. But at what cost? At what expense is that first one in, last one out attitude at the workplace? Right? You're striving for, what are you striving for? That would be the question. Obviously, without being negligent, you don't want to go late, and you can't leave early. You have to fulfill your obligation, especially if it's a contract or an agreement where you say, look, I'll be there at 9 and I'm leaving at 5. That doesn't mean I'm going in at 6 or I'm going in at 7 or at 8 and I'm not leaving until 6, 7, 8 at night. Obviously there may be times and cases that's needed, but that certainly should not be the habit, right? You don't want to prevent your job to prevent you from seeking the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last one, number 6, is you don't simply stay away from the haram. And this is key. You don't simply stay away from the haram, right? You go, well, as long as it's not haram, but doubtful, makruh, etc., it's all fair game. He says you don't simply stay away from the haram, but you should also refrain from that which is considered doubtful. That which causes doubt in your heart. Should I do this or should I not? Is this moral? Is it not? Is this fair? Is it not? If you're having that doubt, then he says, don't rely upon fatwa either. Don't rely upon religious edicts to save you, because you'll find fatwa for just about anything. But what you need to do is you need to search your heart, right? And the pure heart, the heart that is sound and is the heart of a person that's concerned for faith and the hereafter. Then, and of course, there's some awareness and some knowledge there, and there's some honesty. Then a lot of times the heart will kind of set you straight. You'll feel this doesn't seem right, and you should use that inner feeling and that inner voice. You should trust your gut, and you should stick with that. Then obviously, then you can seek further clarification if needed. And those are 6 points that are mentioned there on how a person can balance between their business, their job, whatever it may be, and their faith.